two-sentence horror stories.
After the war, everyone lauded me for the 14 Jews I hid and kept safe from the Nazis in my attic. I hope they never find the 3 I kept for myself in the basement. Please, officer, I'm begging you, send someone. My ex has a knife and he's downstairs. For the last time, miss, you can call back if he's actually done something, because if he hasn't hurt anyone, then I'm not sure what you'd expect me to do. My family all gathered on the lake boat on the 7th anniversary of my brother's disappearance. Our solemn moods shifted to dread as my father yanked on his pole and slowly reeled in a foot with his signature birthmark. I thought the worst part of being lost at sea would be starving to death as our teeth fell out. But as my husband's old scars started opening up, I remembered that our son had been born by cesarean section. Despite the pain, I keep trying to reach for the string of my tampon while the blood smears my fingers and drips down to my wrist. I don't care what the doctors say. Paranoia this and hysteria that. I know there's a tampon stuck in there and I won't stop digging until I get it out. "What smells so good?" asked my father, his voice making Mom instinctively flinch as she tended the simmering pot. "You're just desserts," she whispered, a smile beaming across her bruised face as she doused him in boiling sugar. I couldn't believe my wife would argue so hard for my dog in the divorce, but I was thrilled when she said I could pick him up from the vet. When the vet tech apologized for my loss while handing me the box, I knew I'd lost everything. The year is 2028, and the police have arrested a man trying to break into your home. After you and the intruder's wealthy parents submit the receipts for your legal fees to the judge, it's declared that you caused the intruder emotional distress and you're sentenced to 20 years in prison. I found a secret room in the basement of my new house, containing piles of bones and an old TV, still turned on, and displaying a large number 19. As the door slammed behind me and locked, the number changed to 20. When I saw the spider, my first instinct was to grab my blowtorch. As I held my daughter down and tried to get it to light, I reminded her that I will not tolerate tattoos in my household. Losing my husband was the saddest day of my life, and I broke down in tears. I know how it feels to lose someone really close, but you had to take your pills eventually, said my therapist. When my fun and popular twin suggested we switch clothes for the day, I got excited at the thought of hanging out with the cool kids for a change. It's been a year now, and still no one has realized that it wasn't my body they found in the river that day. When my dad forgot where he put the wrench, everyone stopped and stared. Once deemed incompetent in the bunker, you were put to use as much-needed protein for the remaining survivors. "I have some pot roast on the table for you, honey," my wife said as I got home from work. I thought that was rather strange, considering I was dead broke, we had no food, and had 4 kids who needed to be fed first. We celebrated the end of the war, as it meant we were finally going home after years as POWs. Our celebration turned to panic when we realized our train was taking us further north instead of back south. I yelled at my oldest son after he called me at work, whispering to me that his little brother shot him while playing Call of Duty. "Sweetie, he's too young to be playing that game," I shouted into the phone before hanging up, not knowing that my youngest boy found his dad's gun beneath the floorboard. "Man, you have to tell me the name of your artist," he clapped me on the shoulder, "because I love that massive spider tattoo on your back. I'd never wanted a tattoo before, but at that moment, I truly wished I'd had one." I drove the stake through my daughter's heart, as Dr. Helsing told me to. As the police loaded me into the cruiser, I noticed that Dr. Helsing's reflection didn't show up in the rearview mirror. Football didn't come home this year, but my husband did, reeking of alcohol and rage, his eyes promising a strike I couldn't escape. Usually I'm not this quick to tell people I can see the dead, but in your case I urgently need to make an exception, because the dead can see you. My wife handed me the gun, tears streaming down her eyes as she couldn't bear it herself. I aimed the gun at my dad, or what used to be him. My wife puts our 2 children to bed, with hushed stories of all the things we will do when it's safe to go above ground again. Click, click, click. I slide the last 3 bullets into my old service revolver as I dispose of tonight's dinner, closing the door on a now bare pantry. Today, I found out that my soon-to-be wife has a boyfriend. Seems like I'll have to get rid of him before I ask her out on our first date. The strangers gave me no medicine, no pain relief, and barely any food. The only thing they handed me was a note in my handwriting that I didn't remember writing. I don't want to be a burden. Let me go when it gets bad. Hundreds of millions took the suicide pills rather than face the killer asteroid heading for Earth. The scientists who knew it would miss were all dedicated to population reduction and never broke their vow of silence. They say there's 3 deaths: when your body dies, when you're put in the grave, and when your name is spoken for the last time. As I look across the barren wasteland, I know that the first will be soon, the second, never, and the third, a long time ago. I couldn't believe my wife would argue so hard for my dog in the divorce, but I was thrilled when she said I could pick him up from the vet. When the vet tech apologized for my loss while handing me the box, I knew I'd lost everything. The penis is gone. Never forget I love you, no matter what, I texted my family's group chat. Just then, the shooter leaned under the table and took aim, and I heard my brother's custom text tone sound from his pocket. Catching my wife with another man in the guest room, I emptied an entire clip into them before settling on the couch to think. When my wife called later to remind me that her twin sister and her boyfriend were staying for a few days, the gravity of what I'd done began to sink in. My mom and dad said this was a really common procedure and it was nothing to be afraid of. But the whole family is acting weird. My older sister keeps saying she loves me when she's never said that before. Mom just apologized for little things that I'd forgotten about months ago, and I'm pretty sure I saw Dad crying by my bed last night while I was half asleep. My whole family had been over for a massive feast, but I was the guest of honor, and to me that was a huge deal, considering I was the most unpopular out of everyone. As everyone chows down on their delicious meal, I stare around, grinning from ear to ear, as I reach down to touch the empty space where my leg once was, and think, I'm so glad my family finally loves something about me. A man offered me one of 2 envelopes, one containing the cause of my death and the other containing the date, so without much thought I chose the second one. On the piece of paper it simply read N.A. I broke down sobbing when I received word that all the tests were in and that my daughter was to be drafted for service in the armed forces. I watched her sleeping in her crib that night, knowing that in the morning they would come for her and that she would never know her mother. We captured the injured alien from a crashed ship and chained it up in my basement to study it. As it died, it kept whispering things in its strange language, like agua, por favor, agua, and oh Dios duele. After having 10 miscarriages, I offered the demon my soul in exchange for carrying a baby to term. I sat in my hospital bed and cried as I placed my baby's tiny, motionless fingers against my cheek. When I was diagnosed with autism, my mom took me to the hospital to get me fixed. I woke up in a hospital room with a dull ache and an emptiness below my belly button. My friend was a wreck after the sudden death of her first cat, but was overjoyed when she called to tell me she had adopted a new kitten. While I prepared to go and meet the newest furball, I smiled wickedly as I wrapped her welcoming gift, another fresh bouquet of white lilies. The doctor told me that my husband needed a machine to breathe for him, and that his condition would be reassessed in the morning. When morning came, the only machines that were plugged into the wall were my kids' cell phones. The group of beautiful German women in military uniforms ordered my friends and I to pull down our pants. Unfortunately, they told me to go home while my circumcised friends got to go on a train ride with them. My girlfriend wasn't a fan of the cat scratching the furniture, and when I returned from a week away, I found she had declawed my pets. I knew what I had to do and grabbed my pruning shears to declaw her. My husband was really hurt when I told him I didn't want kids anymore. He was probably more hurt when he realized the crib was empty. I wished to be able to instantly understand any language that is spoken to me. The wind is begging for help, and I don't want to know from what. I smiled as my abusive stepmother was put in handcuffs. It's unfortunate it took such a drastic decision for someone to notice, but I'm at least glad they read my suicide note. After waking up in a bathtub full of ice, missing a kidney, I obviously reported it to the police. The board officer told me that no crime had been committed, since involuntary organ retrieval was covered under the Netflix EULA I had, of course, read and agreed to. Did you know that just 27 standard cotton threads have enough tensile strength to suspend a fully grown adult human by the penis? Or at least I assume they do, since that's the point in my experiments, when the penises started snapping before the string. "Honey, I'm home!" my husband shouted as he opened the front door. It seemed the witness protection program failed me. The fortune teller said I would be hunted by a gang of killers, so I moved to a remote bay in British Columbia, far away from people. No one saw when something big tipped me out of my boat while I fished one evening, or heard me scream as a dozen black horrors pulled me down into the sea.